Deshawn hadn't seen his niece in 5 years. He'd left her a penthouse, a trust fund, everything. Now she was under a bridge, barefoot, holding bankruptcy papers. "It's all gone, Uncle." His wife grabbed the documents. Her hands trembled. "Deshawn, this signature. Your brother's been dead for months. Who signed this last week?" The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday evening, turning the Atlanta streets into rivers of reflected neon. Deshawn sat in the back of his Mercedes, scrolling through property listings on his tablet, while his wife Nicole stared out the window. They'd just left a charity gala downtown, both dressed in evening wear that cost more than most people made in a month. Deshawn was tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from building an empire over 20 years, from turning nothing into something worth hundreds of millions. He was ready to go home, pour himself a drink, and forget about the world for a few hours. But then Nicole grabbed his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his sleeve. "Deshawn," she whispered, her voice carrying a tremor he'd never heard before. "Stop the car." He looked up, annoyed at first, ready to ask why. Then he saw what she was staring at. Under the overpass, illuminated by the harsh, fluorescent lights of a nearby convenience store, was a group of homeless people, huddled together for warmth. Cardboard boxes, torn blankets, the kind of scene you see in every major city, the kind most people train themselves to look past. But Nicole wasn't looking past it. She was staring at one figure in particular, a young woman, skeletal, thin, curled up against the concrete pillar with her arms wrapped around her knees. Even from the car, even through the rain-streaked window, Deshawn could see she was barefoot. Her clothes were little more than rags, and something about the way she held herself, the curve of her shoulders, the angle of her face, made his heart stop. "Pull over," he told the driver, his voice sharp. The Mercedes came to a stop at the curb, and Deshawn was out before Nicole could say another word. The rain soaked through his tuxedo immediately, cold water running down his neck, but he didn't notice. He was walking toward the bridge, toward that figure, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were telling him. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. But as he got closer, as the woman looked up at the sound of his footsteps, he saw her face. Those eyes. His brother's eyes. "Brianna." The name came out strangled, barely audible over the rain. The young woman stared at him, and for a moment there was no recognition, just the blank gaze of someone who'd learned to expect nothing from the world. Then something flickered in her expression. Her lips moved, forming his name without sound at first. "Uncle Deshawn?" Her voice was hoarse, damaged, like she hadn't used it properly in months. Deshawn felt his knees go weak. This was his niece, his brother's daughter, the girl he'd left a penthouse and a trust fund worth $8 million, the girl who should have been living in luxury, finishing college, building a life. Instead, she was here, under a bridge, in rags, barefoot in December rain. Nicole appeared beside him, having braved the rain herself, and when she saw Brianna's face, she gasped. The sound was sharp, almost a cry. "Oh my God, Brianna, baby, what happened to you?" Deshawn knelt down in the puddles, not caring about his expensive shoes or his custom-tailored pants. He reached for Brianna, and she flinched, actually flinched away from him like a beaten animal. The gesture broke something inside his chest. "Where's the penthouse?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Where's the trust fund? Everything I left you? Baby girl, where is everything?" Brianna stared at him for a long moment, then reached into a plastic bag beside her. Her movements were slow, careful, like someone who'd learned that quick movements attracted the wrong kind of attention. She pulled out a folder, wrinkled and water-stained, and handed it to him. "It's all gone, Uncle," she whispered. "Bankrupt, lost everything." Nicole grabbed the documents from Deshawn's shaking hands and opened the folder. Deshawn watched his wife's face go pale in the streetlight, watched her eyes go wide with shock. "Deshawn," she said, her voice barely steady. "This signature, your brother's been dead for months. Who signed this last week?" Deshawn snatched the papers from her, his eyes scanning the bankruptcy filing, the foreclosure notices, the debt consolidation forms. Everything was there. Official stamps, notary seals, legal language that declared Brianna financially ruined. And at the bottom of each page, a signature he'd know anywhere. His brother's signature. Marcus Johnson. Dated 7 days ago. Marcus, who'd been dead for 5 months. Buried in Oakland Cemetery with half of Atlanta's business elite at his funeral. Deshawn felt the world tilt sideways. Get in the car," he said, his voice hard now, controlled. "Brianna, get in the car right now." For a moment she didn't move. She just sat there in the rain looking at him like she didn't quite believe he was real. Like she thought if she blinked, he'd disappear and she'd be alone again under the bridge. "Now," Deshawn repeated, softer this time. "Please, baby girl, let me help you." Nicole was already moving, already wrapping her coat around Brianna's shoulders, helping her stand. The girl could barely walk. Her legs were weak, unsteady, and when Nicole's hand touched her back, Brianna winced. They made their way to the Mercedes, and Deshawn's driver opened the door without a word, his face carefully neutral even though his eyes showed shock. Inside the car, with the heat turned up and the rain shut out, Brianna started shaking, not from cold, though she was freezing, from shock, from the overwhelming reality of being warm and safe for the first time in God knows how long. Deshawn sat across from her, studying her face, and felt rage building in his chest. Someone had done this. Someone had taken everything from this girl and left her to die on the streets. And whoever they were, they'd forged his dead brother's signature to do it. To understand what happened, you have to go back. Back 5 years to when Marcus was still alive and Deshawn was on top of the world. The Johnson brothers had built their empire together, starting with a single duplex in College Park and growing it into a portfolio of commercial properties worth over $200 million. Marcus handled the paperwork, the legal filings, the financial structures. Deshawn handled the deals, the acquisitions, the face-to-face negotiations that turned vacant lots into shopping centers. They were a perfect team. Brothers in blood and business, inseparable since childhood. Marcus had married young, had a daughter named Brianna, and when his wife died of breast cancer, he'd raised that little girl alone. Deshawn remembered Brianna as a child, bright, curious, always asking questions about everything. She'd follow them around construction sites in her little pink hard hat, taking notes in a journal like she was documenting the whole process. Marcus adored her, lived for her. Every deal he made, every property he acquired, it was all to build something for his daughter to inherit. When Brianna turned 16, Marcus started getting sick. At first, it was just fatigue, then weight loss, then the diagnosis, pancreatic cancer, stage 4, inoperable. The doctors gave him 6 months. He lasted 8, fighting the whole way, determined to see Brianna graduate high school. Deshawn spent every day at his brother's bedside, watching the strongest man he'd ever known waste away to nothing. 3 weeks before Marcus died, he called Deshawn into his hospital room alone. The monitors beeped steadily in the background, marking time that was running out. Marcus could barely speak above a whisper, but his grip on Deshawn's hand was surprisingly strong. "Promise me," Marcus had said, his eyes burning with intensity. "Promise me you'll take care of her. Promise me Brianna will never want for anything." Deshawn had made that promise through tears, swearing on everything he held sacred that his niece would be protected, provided for, given every opportunity Marcus had wanted for her. The next day, Deshawn called his lawyer, Jerome Patterson, a man who'd handled the Johnson family's legal affairs for 15 years. Together they created an ironclad trust fund structure. $8 million in a protected account that would pay Brianna a monthly allowance and cover all her expenses until she turned 30. At 30, she'd get full access to the principal. Additionally, Deshawn purchased a penthouse in Buckhead, $4 million worth of luxury living space, and put it directly in Brianna's name. The property was hers, free and clear, no mortgage, no liens. Between the trust fund and the property, Brianna was set for life. She could go to any college she wanted, travel the world, start a business. Whatever she dreamed of, the resources were there. Marcus died 2 days after the trust was finalized, peacefully, in his sleep, with Brianna holding his hand. She was 18 years old, legally an adult, suddenly alone in the world. At the funeral, Deshawn and Nicole had pulled Brianna aside and made an offer. "Come live with us," Nicole had said, her voice gentle but firm. "We have plenty of space. You shouldn't be alone right now." But Brianna had refused. Politely, gratefully, but firmly. She wanted her independence, wanted to honor her father's memory by standing on her own 2 feet. She had the penthouse, the trust fund, everything she needed. She'd be fine. Deshawn had understood. At 18, he'd wanted independence too, so he'd let her go, made her promise to call if she needed anything, and watched her walk away to start her new life. 6 months later, Deshawn got the opportunity of a lifetime, a massive development deal in Dubai, a 3-year contract to build a mixed-use complex worth $500 million. It was the kind of project that could double his net worth, cement his legacy as one of the great developers of his generation. Nicole wanted him to take it. Jerome said the legal structure was solid, and Brianna, when he'd called to tell her, had encouraged him. "Go, Uncle Deshawn," she'd said, her voice bright over the phone. "Dad would want you to take this. I'll be fine, I promise." So he'd gone, moved to Dubai with Nicole, threw himself into the project, and maintained contact with Brianna through video calls and texts. The first year was good. Brianna seemed happy, showed him around the penthouse on FaceTime, talked about her classes at Georgia State, where she was studying business. She looked healthy, sounded stable. Deshawn felt proud of her. The second year, things started to change. Brianna's calls became less frequent. When they did talk, she seemed distracted, quieter than usual. Deshawn chalked it up to her getting busier with school, making new friends, building her own life. Young people didn't need to check in with their uncles every week. It was natural for her to become more independent. The third year, the calls stopped almost entirely. Brianna's responses to his texts became 1 or 2 words. "Fine, busy, talk soon." Deshawn felt a twinge of concern, but Nicole reminded him that this was what growing up looked like. Kids pulled away. It didn't mean something was wrong. By the 4th year, Deshawn was deep in the final stages of the Dubai project, working 18-hour days, managing hundreds of workers and contractors. When Brianna stopped responding to his messages entirely, he told himself he'd deal with it when he got home. She was 22 now, an adult, probably just living her life. Maybe she was dating someone. Maybe she was traveling. Maybe she just needed space. He'd find out when he returned to Atlanta. The Dubai project finished 2 months ago. Deshawn and Nicole returned home triumphant. The project completed ahead of schedule and under budget. One of the first things Deshawn did was try to call Brianna. The number was disconnected. He drove to the Buckhead penthouse, excited to surprise her, maybe take her to dinner and catch up properly. But when he arrived, a young couple answered the door. They'd bought the place a year ago, they said. Paid market value. Had no idea who Brianna was. Deshawn had felt confused, but not alarmed. Maybe she'd sold it. Maybe she wanted something different. The real estate market was hot. She could have made a profit and bought something else. He'd asked Jerome to track her down, find out where she'd moved. But Jerome had retired 6 months earlier, moved to Florida, and the new lawyer handling the Johnson accounts didn't have any recent information on Brianna. The trust fund, they said, had been dissolved. Legally, properly. They showed Deshawn the paperwork. Everything appeared in order. Deshawn had spent the last 2 months casually looking for his niece, assuming she'd turn up eventually. Maybe she'd changed her number. Maybe she was traveling abroad. Maybe she'd gotten married and changed her name. Young people did unpredictable things. He wasn't worried. Annoyed, maybe, that she hadn't kept in touch. But not worried. Until tonight. Until he saw her under that bridge, broken and barefoot, holding bankruptcy papers signed by a dead man. Now, sitting in his mansion's master bathroom while Nicole helped Brianna shower, Deshawn stared at those documents like they held the secrets of the universe. Every page had been notarized. Every signature looked legitimate. The bankruptcy filing showed massive debts, credit cards, personal loans, business ventures that had failed. The foreclosure notice on the penthouse cited unpaid property taxes and HOA fees. It all looked legal, official, real, except for one impossible detail. Marcus's signature dated last week. Marcus, who'd been in the ground for 5 months. When Brianna finally emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in one of Nicole's robes, she looked slightly more human. The layers of street grime were gone, revealing just how thin she'd become. Deshawn could count her ribs through the robe. Nicole had found old scars while helping her wash, cigarette burns on her back, long-healed but unmistakable. Someone had hurt this girl, badly. They sat her down in the kitchen, fed her soup slowly so she wouldn't get sick, and waited. Deshawn had learned patience over the years. Pushing wouldn't help. Brianna needed to feel safe first, needed to trust that this wasn't a dream she'd wake up from back under that bridge. It took until morning. Deshawn and Nicole had put Brianna in one of the guest rooms, tucked her into bed like a child, and left her to sleep. At dawn, Deshawn was sitting in his home office, still staring at the bankruptcy papers, when he heard movement. Brianna appeared in the doorway, wearing clothes Nicole had laid out for her. She looked small, fragile, nothing like the bright-eyed girl who'd followed him around construction sites. "Can I tell you what happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Deshawn nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and Brianna began. "It started 2 years ago," she said. About 6 months after Deshawn had left for Dubai. Brianna had been doing well. Classes were good. The penthouse was beautiful. The monthly allowance from the trust fund was more than enough. She was happy, healing from her father's death, building a future. Then a woman showed up at her door. Her name was Sharon, she said. She was tall, elegant, well-dressed. She had a story ready, delivered with tears that seemed genuine. Sharon claimed to be Marcus's girlfriend, his secret girlfriend, the woman he'd loved for years but couldn't marry because of Brianna. She said Marcus had promised to take care of her after he died, promised her a share of everything. She had proof, photos of herself with Marcus, letters in his handwriting, bank statements showing transfers Marcus had made to her account. Brianna, still grieving, still wanting to believe the best about her father, had listened. Sharon played it perfectly. She didn't demand anything at first, just shared stories about Marcus, cried about losing him, bonded with Brianna over their mutual grief. She became a friend, a confidant, someone who understood what it was like to lose Marcus Johnson. Over weeks, Sharon slowly introduced the idea that Marcus had made promises, legal promises, that he'd wanted Sharon to be provided for, just like Brianna, that it wasn't fair for Brianna to have everything when Marcus had loved them both. Brianna, young and trusting and desperate to honor her father's wishes, had believed it. When Sharon showed her legal documents, papers that claimed Marcus had promised half the trust fund to Sharon in a codicil to his will, Brianna hadn't questioned them. Sharon brought a notary, made everything seem official and proper. She said they were just adjustment papers, documents that would give Sharon access to her fair share while leaving Brianna's portion intact. Brianna signed. She signed everything Sharon put in front of her, believing she was doing what her father would have wanted. Within 2 weeks, Brianna's bank account was empty. The trust fund had been transferred to offshore accounts she couldn't access or trace. Sharon stopped answering her calls. When Brianna tried to contact Jerome, she found out he'd retired. The new lawyer at the firm didn't know her case, didn't have the original trust documents readily available, and told her it would take weeks to sort out. By the time Brianna realized what had happened, it was too late. The money was gone. She tried to hold on to the penthouse, but without the trust fund, she had no income. She couldn't pay property taxes, couldn't pay HOA fees, couldn't afford utilities or food. She'd gotten a job waitressing, trying to cover expenses, but it wasn't nearly enough. Foreclosure notices piled up. She tried calling Deshaun, but he was in Dubai, in meetings, and she couldn't reach him. She left messages that went unreturned. She felt ashamed, stupid, like she'd failed her father's memory by being so naive. The foreclosure went through. Brianna was evicted from the penthouse with nowhere to go. She bounced between friends' couches for a while, but that couldn't last. She was too proud to explain what had happened, too embarrassed to ask for help. Eventually, she ended up on the streets. That was 8 months ago. 8 months of sleeping under bridges, in shelters, in doorways. 8 months of learning how to survive on nothing. She'd tried to find Sharon, tried to track her down, but the woman had vanished completely. The address she'd given was fake. The phone number was disconnected. Even the name Sharon was probably made up. The notary who'd stamped the documents claimed he didn't remember her, said he processed hundreds of papers a week. The bank that had received the trust fund transfer was in the Cayman Islands and wouldn't provide information without a court order. Brianna had gone to the police, but they'd said it was a civil matter, not criminal. They couldn't help. She'd tried calling Deshaun again, but by then his number had changed for the Dubai project, and she didn't have the new one. She was alone, broke, hopeless. The cigarette burns on her back came from a shelter where an older woman had decided Brianna was too pretty, too young, taking up space that belonged to someone who'd been on the streets longer. The woman had held her down, pressed lit cigarettes into her skin, while others watched and did nothing. After that, Brianna had stopped going to shelters. The streets were dangerous, but at least outdoors she could run. Deshaun listened to all of this without interrupting, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. When Brianna finished, when her voice finally gave out and she sat there crying silently, he stood up. "I'm going to fix this," he said, his voice hard as steel. "I'm going to find whoever did this, and I'm going to make them pay." Nicole put a hand on his arm, her eyes showing the same rage he felt. "We'll fix this together," she said. "Brianna's not alone anymore." The first call Deshaun made was to his legal team, not Jerome's old firm, but a group of attorneys who specialized in fraud and financial crimes. Within hours they were in his office, reviewing every document Brianna had. They traced the shell company that had taken ownership of the penthouse. It was registered in Delaware, a notorious haven for corporate secrecy, with layers upon layers of legal protection. The directors listed were all nominee services, paid figureheads who signed papers without asking questions. The actual owners were hidden behind so many corporate veils that breaking through would take months and cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees. The trust fund transfer was even worse. The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands had been closed shortly after receiving the money. The funds had been moved again, probably to Switzerland or Singapore, jurisdictions with even stronger banking privacy laws. without a smoking gun, without proof of fraud that would convince a foreign court to open sealed records. The money was gone forever. For 3 days, Deshawn's team hit wall after wall. Whoever had orchestrated this knew exactly what they were doing. They'd covered their tracks with professional precision, using every legal loophole and privacy protection available. It wasn't the work of a simple con artist. This was sophisticated, planned, executed by someone who understood finance, law, and how to disappear money where it could never be found. Deshawn was ready to hire a private investigator, ready to spend millions hunting down leads, when Nicole made a discovery. She'd been going through the bankruptcy papers again, studying every detail when she noticed something. The notary stamp on several documents came from a firm in Memphis, Tennessee. It was a small detail, easy to miss, but Nicole had a sharp eye for inconsistencies. Why would someone in Atlanta use a notary from Memphis? She cross-referenced it with the documents Brianna had kept from her meetings with Sharon. Different papers, different dates, but the same notary firm. Memphis Mobile Notary Services. It was a connection, a thread, the first real lead they'd found. Deshawn and Nicole were on a plane to Memphis the next morning. The notary office was exactly what Deshawn had expected. A small, shabby operation in a strip mall between a check-cashing place and a dollar store. The kind of business that survived on volume, stamping hundreds of documents a week without asking too many questions. The owner, a nervous man in his 50s named Gerald, went pale when Deshawn walked in with 2 lawyers. At first, Gerald claimed he didn't remember anything. He processed so many documents, saw so many faces. How could he possibly recall one specific transaction from 2 years ago? Deshawn let his lawyers explain in very clear terms that Gerald's notary seal had been used to authenticate fraudulent documents, that federal charges for notary fraud carried up to 10 years in prison, that his business license would be revoked, his assets seized, his reputation destroyed, that unless he cooperated fully right now, he was going to lose everything. Gerald broke in under 5 minutes. Yes, he remembered. A man had come in, offered him $50,000 in cash to stamp some papers. Gerald hadn't asked questions, hadn't verified identities, hadn't done any of the things notaries are legally required to do. The money had been too good. He'd stamped the papers, taken the cash, and tried to forget about it. Who was the man? Gerald didn't have a name, but he had a description: tall, black, about 40, with a scar over his left eyebrow, well-dressed, professional, spoke like an educated man, not a street criminal, and he had a phone number. Gerald had kept it just in case. Just in case what, he wouldn't say, but Deshawn suspected the notary had been hoping to blackmail someone eventually. Gerald handed over a business card, worn and bent from being carried in a wallet for 2 years. No name on the card, just a phone number with a Memphis area code. Deshawn called the number right there in the parking lot. It rang 4 times before someone picked up. Yeah? The voice was male, cautious, guarded. I'm looking for the person who hired a Memphis notary 2 years ago, Deshawn said, keeping his voice neutral. I have a business proposition. There was a long pause. Deshawn could hear background noise, a television maybe, or traffic. Who is this? The voice asked. Someone willing to pay for information, Deshawn replied. $100,000 for a name, cash, no questions asked. Another pause. Then, the arcade, downtown Memphis, 1 hour. The line went dead. Deshawn looked at Nicole, who'd been listening on speaker. This could be a trap, she said. Could be, Deshawn agreed, but it's the best lead we've got. They met in the arcade restaurant, a downtown Memphis landmark that had been serving food since the 1920s. The man who showed up was exactly as Gerald had described. Tall, black, scar over his left eyebrow. He sat down across from Deshawn without shaking hands, his eyes constantly scanning the room. You got the money? He asked. Deshawn slid a manila envelope across the table. The man opened it just enough to see the stacks of hundreds inside, then closed it quickly. "What do you want to know?" "Who hired you to set up the notary fraud?" Deshawn said. "I want a name." The man, he'd introduced himself only as Raymond, studied Deshawn for a long moment. "You're the uncle," he said finally. "The girl's uncle. The one who built all those buildings." Deshawn didn't confirm or deny, just waited. Raymond shrugged. "I didn't know what it was about. Just got hired to be a middleman. Set up the notary, deliver some papers, make some calls. Easy money." "The name," Deshawn repeated. "Woman named Sharon," Raymond said, "except that wasn't her real name. Real name's Vanessa Clark." The name hit Deshawn like a physical blow. Vanessa, Marcus's ex-wife, Brianna's stepmother from hell, the woman who'd made Marcus's life miserable for 3 years before he'd finally divorced her. Deshawn had completely forgotten about her. She'd disappeared after the divorce, moved away, hadn't been heard from in over a decade. "She local?" Deshawn asked, his voice tight. "Memphis?" Raymond nodded. "Got an apartment in Midtown, fancy place, paid in cash." He rattled off an address, and Deshawn committed it to memory. "She know you're talking to me." "Nobody knows nothing," Raymond said, standing up. "And I was never here." He took the envelope and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Deshawn sat there for a moment, processing. Vanessa. It all made sense now. She'd known about the trust fund because she'd been married to Marcus when he was building his wealth. She'd known about Brianna's vulnerabilities because she'd lived with the girl for 3 years. She'd known exactly how to manipulate a grieving young woman because she'd studied Marcus's daughter, learned her psychology, planned this revenge for over a decade. The divorce had left Vanessa with almost nothing. Marcus had a prenuptial agreement that protected his assets. She'd walked away with $50,000 and a restraining order after Marcus had discovered she was cheating with 3 different men. She'd sworn revenge, threatened Marcus in court, said he'd regret leaving her with nothing. And then she'd vanished. Marcus had assumed she'd moved on. Deshawn had forgotten she existed, but Vanessa hadn't forgotten. She'd waited, watched, learned that Marcus had died and left everything to Brianna, saw her opportunity for revenge and profit combined, and she'd executed her plan perfectly. Deshawn found Vanessa's apartment building within the hour. It was nice, a renovated historic building in Midtown Memphis, the kind of place that charged $4,000 a month for a 2-bedroom, the kind of place you could afford if you'd stolen $8 million from a grieving girl. He buzzed her apartment. No answer. Buzzed again. On the 3rd try, a woman's voice came through the intercom. "Who is it?" "Deshawn Johnson," he said clearly. "We need to talk." There was a long silence. Then the door buzzed open. Vanessa's apartment was on the 4th floor. Deshawn took the stairs, Nicole beside him, both of them tense and ready for anything. The apartment door was already open when they arrived. Vanessa stood in the doorway, and Deshawn barely recognized her. She'd aged, of course. It had been over 10 years. But more than that, she looked different, harder, colder. Her eyes had a calculating quality that made Deshawn's skin crawl. "Deshawn," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "After all these years. Come in." The apartment was beautifully furnished. Expensive art on the walls, designer furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of downtown Memphis. The kind of luxury that $8 million could buy. Deshawn walked in slowly, taking it all in. Nicole stayed close to the door, her phone in her hand, ready to call for help if needed. "You know why I'm here," Deshawn said. Vanessa smiled. Actually smiled, like they were old friends catching up. "I imagine it has something to do with little Brianna," she said. "How is she, by the way? Still living that penthouse life?" Deshawn felt his hands curl into fists. She was living under a bridge, he said, his voice deadly quiet, starving, barefoot, covered in scars. Vanessa's smile didn't waver. "Oh, dear," she said, with absolutely no sincerity. "That is unfortunate. You stole everything from her," Deshawn continued, "pretended to be someone named Sharon, manipulated her into signing away her inheritance, forged my brother's signature on bankruptcy papers. You committed federal fraud, identity theft, and God knows what else." Vanessa walked to her bar cart and poured herself a glass of wine. "Would you like a drink?" she asked. "I have an excellent Bordeaux." "I want the money back," Deshawn said. "Every penny, and then I want you in prison." Vanessa laughed. Actually laughed like he'd told a hilarious joke. "The money's gone, Deshawn. Offshore accounts, untraceable. Even if you could prove I took it, which you can't, you'd never see a penny." "I can prove it," Deshawn said. "I have the notary. I have Raymond. I have enough to put you away for 20 years. Vanessa took a sip of her wine. "Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you have a notary who admits to fraud, which makes him an unreliable witness. You have a middleman who'll disappear the second you try to subpoena him. And you have some paperwork that Brianna signed voluntarily. She's an adult. She made a choice." "You manipulated her," Nicole said from the doorway, speaking for the first time. "She was grieving. You took advantage of her." "I presented her with an opportunity," Vanessa corrected. "She chose to sign. That's not manipulation. That's business." Deshawn stepped closer to Vanessa, and something in his expression made her smile, finally falter. "Why?" he asked. "Marcus divorced you a decade ago. Why wait all this time? Why hurt his daughter?" Vanessa's face hardened. "Because Marcus left me with nothing," she spat. "I gave him 3 years of my life, raised his brat of a daughter, played the perfect wife, and when I made one mistake, a few harmless affairs, he threw me out like garbage. $50,000, that's all I got. Do you know what he was worth when he died? Over $100 million, and he left it all to that girl, his precious princess, the daughter who never appreciated anything." "So this was revenge," Deshawn said. "Revenge and profit," Vanessa agreed. "Marcus owed me, and since he's dead, I collected from what he left behind." She finished her wine and set the glass down. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a dinner reservation. You can see yourselves out." Deshawn pulled out his phone. "I recorded this entire conversation," he said. "Every word, confession to fraud, theft, and conspiracy." Vanessa's eyes widened, and for the first time she looked genuinely worried. Then she laughed again, but it sounded forced. "So what? You'll go to the police? The FBI? Go ahead. By the time they get a warrant, I'll be in a country with no extradition treaty. The money's already gone. You'll never touch it. And me? I'll be on a beach somewhere, drinking mojitos with Marcus's money." She walked to the door and opened it. "Get out of my home," she said, "and tell Brianna I said hello." Deshawn didn't move. He just stood there, staring at her, and something in his eyes made Vanessa take a step back. "You think you've won," he said quietly. "You think because the money's gone, you get to walk away free, but you're wrong. Because I don't need the money. I can rebuild Brianna's life with my own fortune. What I need is justice, and I promise you, Vanessa, you're going to pay for what you did." He walked past her toward the door, Nicole following. In the hallway, he turned back one more time. "Enjoy Memphis while you can," he said, "because wherever you run, I'll find you, and I'll make sure you spend the rest of your life in a cage." The next morning, Deshawn turned over everything he had to the FBI, the recordings, the notary's testimony, Raymond's information, the trail of documents showing how the trust fund had been dismantled. It took 6 weeks for the FBI to build their case, but when they moved fast. Vanessa was arrested at Memphis International Airport trying to board a flight to Costa Rica with 3 fake passports and $200,000 in cash. The federal prosecutor charged her with wire fraud, identity theft, notary fraud, and conspiracy. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Raymond testified in exchange for immunity. Gerald, the notary, testified to save his business. Deshawn and Brianna both took the stand, telling their stories to a jury that looked more horrified with each passing day. Vanessa's defense attorney tried to argue that Brianna had signed the documents willingly, that there was no proof of coercion. But the evidence was overwhelming. The fake identity, the forged signatures, the offshore accounts, the calculated manipulation of a grieving young woman. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they came back, the verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. The judge sentenced Vanessa to 18 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. She showed no remorse. Even at sentencing, when given the chance to speak, she blamed everyone but herself. Blamed Marcus for divorcing her. Blamed Brianna for being naive. Blamed Deshawn for interfering. The judge cut her off mid-sentence. "I've seen a lot of criminals in my courtroom," the judge said, "but rarely have I seen someone with so little conscience. You destroyed a young woman's life out of greed and spite. You deserve every day of the sentence I'm giving you." Vanessa was led away in handcuffs, still talking, still making excuses. Brianna watched her go, and for the first time in months, Deshawn saw something like peace in his niece's eyes. Outside the courthouse, Brianna turned to Deshawn. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not giving up on me." Deshawn pulled her into a hug. "I'm your family," he said. "Family doesn't give up." The rebuilding took time. Deshawn couldn't restore the original trust fund. That money was gone, scattered across foreign accounts that would take decades to recover if they ever could be. But he had his own fortune. He created a new trust for Brianna, smaller this time, $2 million, but managed carefully with safeguards to prevent another theft. Brianna moved into Deshawn and Nicole's mansion, not permanently, they all understood, but for as long as she needed. She started therapy twice a week, working through the trauma of what she'd endured, the nightmares, the hypervigilance, the fear that at any moment someone would take it all away again. She enrolled in online classes at Georgia State, picking up where she'd left off. The university, when they heard her story, offered her a full scholarship and academic counseling. She started slowly, 2 classes the first semester, but she was determined to finish what she'd started. Deshawn offered her a job at his real estate company, and to his surprise, she accepted. She started in the property management division, learning the business from the ground up. She was good at it, had her father's mind for details and her uncle's instinct for people. 6 months after the trial, on Brianna's 24th birthday, Deshawn took her for a drive. He didn't tell her where they were going, just said it was a surprise. When they pulled up in front of the Buckhead penthouse, Brianna's face went pale. "Uncle Deshawn," she started, but he held up a hand. "I bought it back," he said. "Cost me almost double what I paid the first time, but I didn't care. This was always supposed to be yours." He handed her the keys. "When you're ready," he said. "No pressure. You can stay with us as long as you want. But when you're ready to stand on your own again, this is here, waiting for you." Brianna took the keys with shaking hands. They went up together, Deshawn and Nicole and Brianna, and walked through the empty penthouse. Someone had renovated it. New floors, new paint, new fixtures, but the bones were the same. The view was the same. The home Brianna's father had wanted her to have was still here. "I'm not ready yet," Brianna said, her voice small. "I know," Deshawn replied, "but you will be." It took another 6 months. 6 months of therapy, of slowly rebuilding trust in herself and the world, of learning to sleep through the night without nightmares, of understanding that what happened to her wasn't her fault. One Saturday morning, Brianna came down to breakfast and announced, "I'm ready to move into the penthouse." Nicole cried. Deshawn tried not to, but failed. They helped her move in that weekend, filling the space with furniture and photographs, and all the pieces of a life that was finally, truly, hers again. Brianna graduated college with honors a year later. She'd majored in business with a minor in social work, and her thesis was about financial fraud targeting vulnerable populations. She turned it into a nonprofit organization, Second Chance Financial, dedicated to helping fraud victims navigate the legal system and rebuild their lives. She worked full-time at Deshawn's company but ran the nonprofit on weekends and evenings. It started small, just Brianna and a handful of volunteers, but word spread. Other victims found her, young people who'd been scammed, elderly people who'd lost their savings, immigrants who'd been taken advantage of. She helped them all, using her story to connect, using her experience to guide them through the darkness. 2 years after moving back into the penthouse, Brianna stood on the balcony with Deshawn and Nicole, looking out over Atlanta. The city lights spread below them like stars. "I've been thinking," Brianna said, "about going back to the bridge." Nicole looked alarmed. "Why would you?" "Not to stay," Brianna clarified quickly. "To help. There are people there, people like I was, lost, forgotten. I want to do something." So they started a program. Once a month, Brianna's nonprofit would visit homeless encampments around Atlanta. They brought food, blankets, clothes, but more importantly, they brought information, resources, legal help for those who'd been victimized, medical care for those who needed it, hope for those who'd forgotten what it looked like. Brianna never told her story unless someone asked. She didn't need to perform her trauma. But when people saw the scars on her arms, the ones she no longer tried to hide, they understood. She'd been where they were. And if she could make it out, maybe they could too. 3 years after Deshawn found her under that bridge, Brianna returned to that exact spot. It was a Thursday evening, cool but not cold, the downtown traffic humming in the background. She brought supplies with her, food, water, hygiene kits, and set them up on a folding table. A few people approached cautiously. One was a young woman, maybe 19, with hollow eyes and torn jeans. She hung back, watching but not engaging. Brianna recognized that look, the suspicion, the fear that any kindness was a trap. "Hey," Brianna said gently, approaching with her hands visible, non-threatening. "I'm Brianna. I'm with Second Chance Financial. We help people who've been scammed or stolen from." The girl didn't respond, just stared. "I used to sleep here," Brianna continued, gesturing to the bridge. "Right over there, actually, against that pillar, for 8 months. That got a reaction. The girl's eyes widened slightly. "You?" "Me," Brianna confirmed. "Lost everything to someone I trusted. Ended up on the streets. No family, no money, no hope." She pulled a business card from her pocket. "If you ever want to talk, or if you need help, or if you just want a hot meal and a shower, no questions asked, call this number." The girl took the card with trembling fingers. "What if—" she started, then stopped. "What if it's too late? What if I can't come back from this?" Brianna smiled. It was a real smile, warm and genuine and full of something the girl probably hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. "It's never too late," Brianna said. "I promise you that. I was where you are. Worse, maybe, and I made it. You can too." The girl didn't call that night or the next night. But a week later, Brianna's phone rang, a young voice, scared but determined. "You said I could call, that it wasn't too late." "It's not," Brianna replied, already reaching for her keys. "Where are you? I'm coming to get you." As she drove across the city to pick up a stranger who reminded her so much of herself, Brianna thought about her father, about the empire he'd built, about the daughter he'd raised to be strong, even when strength felt impossible, about the uncle who'd never stopped looking for her, even when she'd been invisible to everyone else. The money Vanessa had stolen was gone forever. Brianna had accepted that. But what she'd gained, the empathy, the purpose, the absolute certainty that she could survive anything, was worth more than any trust fund. She pulled up to the address the girl had given her, a bus stop on the edge of downtown. The girl was there, clutching a garbage bag with what Brianna assumed were her only possessions. Brianna unlocked the passenger door. "Get in," she said. "You're safe now." And as they drove away from that bus stop, away from the streets that had tried to break them both, Brianna made a silent promise to her father, to her uncle, to herself. She would never forget where she'd been, would never forget what it felt like to have nothing and no one. And she would spend the rest of her life making sure that other people, people like the scared girl sitting beside her, knew they weren't alone, that there was a way out, that someone cared. The bridge that had almost destroyed her had become her purpose. The betrayal that had left her broken had taught her how to help others heal. And the uncle who'd refused to give up on her had shown her what real family meant. Not blood, not obligation, but love. Unconditional, unwavering forever. Deshawn had saved her life that rainy Tuesday night. But in the years since, Brianna had learned something important. He hadn't just saved her, he'd given her a reason to save herself. And now she was passing that gift forward to everyone she met who needed it. Brianna's story isn't just about money lost and found. It's about trust betrayed and rebuilt, about falling into darkness and choosing to climb back into the light. Vanessa took everything from her, except her spirit, and in the end, that's what saved her. If this story touched you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel because we bring you real stories about real people facing impossible odds. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's struggling, someone who thinks they can't come back from rock bottom. Drop a comment below telling me what you would have done in Deshawn's position. Would you have chosen revenge or rebuilding? Remember, sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones closest to us, but sometimes the people who save us are the ones who never gave up looking. Stay strong, stay wise, and I'll see you in the next story.